Hi, everybody, and welcome to the SAMHE Findings webinar. We are absolutely delighted to have you here with us today. I just wanted to start with an introduction of myself and then some housekeeping. So I am Sarah West. I'm Director of the Stockholm Environment Institute at the University of York. We are the SAMHE team here today. We are absolutely delighted to talk to you about what we've found out on the project so far. So I'm just going to talk you through what is going to happen. So I'm doing the welcome and the housekeeping. The housekeeping notes are that we are recording this webinar. So please make sure that you are kept mic off and camera off at all times. We will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. There's a Q&A function. So please do ask questions of the panelists, and you can ask questions as we go along and as you think of questions, or you can leave them until the end. Either is completely fine. Please do note that there is an option for you to submit your questions in anonymous mode, which you can do, and that will mean that we won't have any identifying features of you. So that would be good if you could do that. So then we're going to move on to an introductory presentation from our project lead, Dr. Henry Burridge, and he's going to talk through the SAMHE approach and the achievements that we've had in SAMHE so far. Then we're going to move on to presentations about the findings, so what we've discovered about indoor air quality in schools through the amazing data set that schools have been working with us to collect. So that's from Sam Wood and Alice Handy. And then we're going to move into the Q&A session. And then I'm going to wrap up by talking about what's next for SAMHE. And then you're all free to go. So with no further ado, we will get ourselves started. So Henry, we'll hand over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you. So, starting with what is SAMHE? SAMHE is about schools air quality monitoring for health and education. So if you can click, please. And SAMHE began about 2 years ago, really with the aim of working with schools in the UK to improve understanding of air quality in schools. Next slide, please. So why do we think indoor air quality is important? We spend an enormous amount of our time indoors, and pupils and school staff spend a lot of that time at schools. So it's particularly important for them. And poor air quality has links to various health implications, and these span very long-term impacts that can arise to our hearts and our lungs, more acute impacts like making asthma worse, and range through to things that really affect learning in schools quite drastically: headaches and drowsiness, and lower cognitive function and inability to concentrate. Next, please. So SAMHE is a unique project, and we'll talk about that as we move through. And part of the reason that it's unique is that it employs citizen science methodologies. And citizen science is really about involving members of the public in alongside collaborative projects with professional scientists. And so we send air quality monitors to schools, and then they receive some benefits and we receive some data. And the 5 key metrics that we've listed there are all of relevance for different aspects, ranging from how comfortable people feel, to how ventilated the space is, to how polluted the space might be. Next slide, please. So we've had 2 years of funding, and that's coming to an end. So we really want to tell you sort of where we are as of now. So clarification on the methodology: a school registers on the website, they then get posted a high-spec air quality monitor, which is Wi-Fi enabled. They connect it to the school's Wi-Fi, and then they get free access to our SAMHE web app. The web app allows them to see their own data, but also put in contextual data, which is valuable for research. And all the time, this data is being sent in a way that we can efficiently analyze all of this data. Next slide, please. So really, the citizen science aspects of the project allow this scalability. It devolves some responsibilities for the school to connect their monitor, but then it enables schools to engage with their data, and through the web app, we really seek to raise the awareness. So there's this real dual benefit, both for the scientists and for the schools. And we also employed citizen science approaches in co-designing the web app, so that we didn't provide a web app that us scientists thought might be useful. It really reflects what schools told us that they want to see. Next slide, please. So the web app is a really significant provision, and broadly speaking, it's in two parts. Lots of data visualization so that staff and pupils can see the data from their environment, and then we provide an enormous amount of activities to keep pupils engaged and provide staff with the ability to run science clubs and science lessons connected to the air quality. And we have about 1,500 pupils and staff who've set up accounts on the web app. So when a pupil logs in or a staff member logs into the web app, they see a screen something like this. And broadly speaking, you can see that they're directed towards looking at either their live data or the activities. So let's have a look at the live data. We provide a wide range of plots, classic sort of time series scatter plots, correlation plots, single axis scatter, really useful for younger pupils, gauge charts and pie charts and bar charts, are all useful at different stages in the school curriculum. So there's lots of provision there. And then the activities, that you can see there's a sort of a wealth of activities that would sit below here, and you can just see the tops of 8 different cards, and each card draws the staff member or pupil into a different activity, and there's a key to help people understand what the activity might involve, ranging from quizzes to data analysis to tutorials to help them understand what they see, to get them starting to talk about air quality more generally, but things right through to thinking about careers in science and other careers too. Next slide, please. And then the web app is accessible through our website, and the website is a really valuable provision in that you don't have to be a member of the project to access it. It's fully all the data on the website is fully available to everyone, irrespective of who they are or where they are in the world. We include all of our outputs there openly, so we have access to all of our scientific journal articles with open access links and school-friendly summaries of each. And then we write technical reports about interesting events we see in the data. And at the end of each term, we've been writing up an individual report based on all the data from that school term. Next, please. In terms of our numbers for engagement and reach, we've recruited 1,321 schools from across the 4 nations in the United Kingdom. To each of these schools, we've deployed monitors, and about 900 of those monitors have sent us data. and we still get about we get data from about 750 or so of those monitors at the moment. Next, please. So that's a huge amount of data just in this school year. We've gathered about 40,000 days worth of data from schools, and every single day represents an occupied period that the within a school that the monitor measured, and every minute it gives us data for each of our 5 metrics. So this is a research project, and we've worked hard to document the novelty of the methodology, and that's resulted in 2 peer-reviewed articles being published already. And then we've sought to develop new methodologies for analysis alongside publishing peer-reviewed articles based on the data that we've gathered itself. And we haven't just sat with scientific-facing outputs. We've worked very hard to contribute towards policy and have had various interactions with UK Parliament and associated organisations to shape policy and future direction around schools and air quality. Particularly being a citizen science project, it's really important that our engagement is broad in terms of media. So we've really put a lot of effort into our social media presence, both on X and LinkedIn. And then we've used all other media outlets that we can to spread our message and get schools engaged in the project and feedback our findings. And that's included appearances on BBC Newsround. Next, please. So I'm going to hand over now to Sam, who's going to start telling us about the findings.
Hi, I'm Sam Wood. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've learned about ventilation in classrooms from the SAMHE project. Slide, please. So everyone knows that people give off carbon dioxide when they breathe out, and this is removed from ventilation. So the number of people in a room, the age of the people, the activities they're doing can all affect the amount of carbon dioxide they produce. And this can be useful for us because it means we can tell how well ventilated a room is based on the level of carbon dioxide measured on our SAMHE monitors. Next, please. So the majority of schools in the UK are naturally ventilated, so they just use windows as their main way of providing ventilation. And when it's warm, people tend to open their windows more and shut them when it's cold. So ventilation rates are closely linked to outdoor temperatures. So we started off by looking at the outdoor temperature and how that affects CO2 levels in SAMHE schools. And we looked at the first full term of SAMHE data, which was the autumn term last year. So over this period, there were 4 distinct weather periods. We started off the term with a really warm period. This is the average outdoor UK temperature at the time. And then there was a period of intermediate temperature, which I've shaded in yellow, followed by a very cold period shaded in blue, and then another sort of intermediate temperature period. And we want to know, how does the ventilation in British classrooms change in relation to these weather periods? Next slide, please. So we can now use these same weather bands and show a similar plot, but now we're looking at the daily mean carbon dioxide level across all of our SAMHE monitors. So this is averaged across all active SAMHE monitors on a given day, showing the same weather periods. And we can really distinctly see that the carbon dioxide levels were much lower during this warm weather period at the start, and then much higher during this cold weather period. And these 2 sort of yellow intermediate periods fall somewhere in between. We can also see the government guideline for CO2 levels for naturally ventilated classrooms shown in this red dashed line. And we can see that during the cold period, actually quite a lot of our schools were frequently going over the government ventilation guideline for CO2 levels. Next slide, please. So we've seen that from the SAMHE data set, we can really clearly see that weather is a really important factor affecting ventilation rates in schools. We looked at some other sort of school-wide factors to see what else had an influence on classroom ventilation rate. We found that generally private schools showed lower carbon dioxide levels than state schools, and schools in more deprived areas generally seem to be more poorly ventilated. Schools in rural areas and in urban areas generally showed pretty similar ventilation levels. Secondary schools showed higher CO2 levels than primary schools. We expect this is just because children breathe out more CO2 as they get older. And we looked at the target number of pupils which all schools have, which they're sort of, you know, their target. And we found that schools that exceeded this target showed higher CO2 levels than schools which fell under this target. Next slide, please. So schools moving forward can continue to use the SAMHE monitors to keep an eye on ventilation rates by checking the CO2 levels. And this is particularly important in colder weather because windows tend to open less. Teachers and pupils can mitigate this by trying to open them more, especially during break times, in order to better ventilate the classroom in between lessons. Meanwhile, SAMHE will continue to monitor schools' air quality and will also work with the government, union, school leaders to improve classroom air quality. And we'll be using the SAMHE data set as evidence for this. I'll now hand over to Alice, who will talk a bit about particulate matter in classrooms.
Hello, I'm Alice Handy. And yeah, I'm going to continue talking about some other data we've been analysing. So alongside carbon dioxide, like Sam's just talked about, SAMHE monitors also measure particulate matter. Particulate matter describes the mixture of solid particles and liquid droplets in the air, and you may have seen it abbreviated to PM. There are many different sources that come from outdoors, such as traffic, and indoors, such as cooking and dust. And often particulate matter is classified by its size. So the picture on the right compares different sizes of particulate matter to the width of a human hair. Next, Sarah. We're going to focus on PM. Oh, sorry. Let me just go back one. We're going to focus on PM 2.5, which are particles that have a diameter of 2.5 micrometers or less. And we're particularly interested in these particles because they're very fine and can be breathed into the body, and we know these very small particles can affect people's health, especially for children. Next slide. So alongside looking at the autumn data, like we've just seen Sam's shown us, we're going to look at spring data as well. And we know that particulate matter can come from outdoors. So we're going to compare the data from a selected number of SAMHE schools, as shown by the blue dots on the map, to the data from weather stations run by the government near to these schools, shown by the green dots on the map. If we just start by examining the autumn term and look at the next slide, thank you. This blue line shows the particulate matter concentration averaged over those weather stations, and we can see as the line rises and falls, the outdoor levels of particulate matter have increased and decreased. If we next look at the school levels, we can see in red the concentration averaged across SAMHE schools, and we see again as the blue line rises and falls, often so does the red line. So clearly the SAMHE schools concentration is quite closely linked to the outdoor levels, and in particular when there are peaks in concentration in SAMHE schools, this is usually at the same time as when there are peaks in concentration outdoors. The WHO, or the World Health Organization, gives guidelines on air quality, and for particulate matter gives a daily average guideline of 50 micrograms per meter cubed. We can see here that there's one period where this level is exceeded. So if we go to the next slide, in September, we know that Saharan dust was blown from the Sahara up through Europe and to the UK. So the top image shows a satellite image of PM over Europe and the UK. One click, please. And one more click. We can see in the orange panel when this occurred during the school term. The next image on the right shows red sunsets, and you may remember particularly red sunsets in September, and also you may remember red dust settling on cars. And it was clear from looking at the red line and blue line in the plot that some of this dust came into SAMHE classrooms. It's also worth noting that at the start, this occurred at the start of the academic year for both England and Wales. So any dust that settled out of the air over the summer holidays may have been agitated back up into the air as people came back to school. Next slide. So the Saharan dust event is something that affected the entire nation, and but fireworks are an example of an event that are more local to schools. And I think one more click or two more clicks. Both Fireworks Night and Diwali occurred in November and celebrated using fireworks. So we can see that during these periods, both the outdoor and levels in semi-schools increased. This is fairly interesting because typically fireworks are set off in the evening or over weekends, and we'd expect school buildings to be closed during these periods. But despite that, the levels in classrooms of particulate matter have increased. Next slide, please. So if we consider just what happens during school times, well, so we disregard the weekends and the holidays. So one more click. We take out the data during half term and the data during the Christmas holidays, and we just look at the hours of 9 to 4. We can see that Fireworks Night occurred just at the end of the half term period and Diwali the weekend after. What's interesting to see is that although PM had clearly come into school buildings during fireworks and Diwali night, by the time school starts on Monday, next clip please, we see that the levels in classrooms are much reduced. Next slide please. So we're next going to look at both the spring and autumn term. If we click once more, we again can think about this WHO guideline of 15 microgram per meter cubed. Next slide. And we can see that not only in September, but also in March, there was a period where there was elevated levels of PM. This occurred in both the outdoor and SAMHE school data. Next. It's not as clear as in September as what could have caused this, but we can do some analysis such as looking at the type of particulate matter and looking at where air masses that arrive in the UK have originated from. And we can predict that potentially agricultural, transport and fuel burning emissions originating in both Northern Europe and the UK could have contributed to these high levels of outdoor particulate matter and clearly high levels of indoor particulate matter in our SAMHE classrooms. Next slide. If we consider the levels during school hours only, we can see that during these large events, particulate matter remains high in class. The levels of particulate matter remain high in classrooms. Next slide. Clearly, outdoor concentration really affects classroom concentration of particulate matter. So we're going to consider smaller events. One click, please. So we're going to consider a threshold for smaller events to be the median plus 1 standard deviation as calculated over the 7-month period, and consider an outdoor event to be any day when the outdoor concentration exceeded this threshold, and think about how this affects our classroom concentration levels. So the blue panels show any day that this threshold was exceeded when we consider an outdoor event. It's not as clear, again, as what could have caused all of these, but we can do some similar analysis to the March event and find out that if we click once, some of these events might be caused by sea salt. Next. Other events caused by farming emission. Next. Lots of these events probably had significant contributions from secondary aerosols and fuel burning emissions. Next. In January, Saharan dust was again blown to the UK. And then finally, it's not always clear the reason for some of these outdoor events. Next slide. If we consider when pupils are at school, so during school hours only, we can see that for some of these events, the elevated levels outdoors remain, and they also remain elevated during school hours. Next. But we do see that some of these events are less prevalent during school hours. So it's really crucial that we consider what happens when people are occupying our buildings. Next slide, please. In terms of thinking about longer term impact of these levels of PM in classrooms, we can think about an exposure. So we can take the let the concentration during school hours in classrooms, multiply it or integrate it with respect to time and multiply it by a breathing rate to get an estimation of a likely exposure during school hours. So the bar plot on the right shows in grey the total predicted exposure of 2000 micrograms. And if we click once more, the coloured sections show the contribution due to events. So this orange section shows the contribution to that total predicted exposure due to the September event next. In pink due to this March event, and then next in blue due to all of these smaller events combined. One more click, please. So these events in total contributed to about 15% of the school days over the 2 terms. However, the exposure, if we click once more, contributed to over 40% of the exposure due to these events contributed to over 40% of the total exposure. If we go to the next slide, if we consider just these 2 large events on their own, they contributed to 8% of school days. One more click. And then if we click again, we can see that they account for 32% of the exposure. So whilst most of a long-term exposure is likely made up of concentrations due to, on low concentration days, I should say, the contribution due to these periods of elevated PM outdoors is fairly significant. Next slide, please. So what have we found out? We know that classroom particulate matter levels can be affected by outdoor events, both on a national scale and those that happen more locally to schools. So some of these smaller events, like those fireworks events we saw in November, occur during weekends, and particulate matter still enters the schools when they might be closed, but by the time people return to school on Monday, the levels have much reduced. Larger events can affect PM as well, and we see events and particulate matter as far as Africa affecting classroom data in the UK. Next slide. So what can we do about this? It's really important that we keep collecting data from schools, so not only during school hours, but also when schools are closed to gain a full picture of what is going on. For schools themselves, they can keep an eye on their PM readings on their SAMHE monitors and use ventilation as a way to manage their air quality. Finally, as a team, the SAMHE team is continuing to communicate these results to all the relevant people and really try to identify key ways that particulate matter can be reduced in classrooms. I'm going to hand back to Sarah now.
Thanks, Alice. So just in conclusion then, so we've seen that classroom ventilation rates change with outdoor temperature, but also depend on other school factors, such as size of classroom. Schools in less deprived areas showed lower CO2 levels than those in more deprived areas. Secondary schools have higher CO2 levels than primary schools. And as Alice has just been explaining, classroom particulate matter concentrations are closely linked to outdoor particulate matter concentrations, and long-term exposure is significantly affected by those outdoor events. So it's really important that we keep monitoring indoor air quality in schools. And SAMHE has shown that research that is done with schools benefits everybody. So thank you for listening to the presentation part. And now we're going to get on to the Q&A section. But I just wanted to highlight that there's plenty of more information on this on the SAMHE Output page, which my colleague Lucy will pop into the chat screen for you to go and peruse at your leisure. So there's a technical report on the Sahara dust, another one on the fireworks stuff, and then termly analysis of the SAMHE data. And then you can also find summaries and links to the full versions of the academic papers that Henry mentioned earlier. And as ever, you can find us on our socials. So we are going to move into the Q&A part of the meeting. So I would like all our panelists to switch themselves back on again, and we will answer your questions. So let's get ourselves started. There's some really great questions coming in, so thank you so much, everybody. I can see some of them have been already answered. So one I'd like to start with is, will schools still have access to the web app to monitor results once funding ends? Henry, would you like to answer this one?
Yeah, sure. So we've actually ring-fenced funding to support the provision of the website the web app and all of the data architecture through to at least 2030, and that will continue beyond, I expect.
Fabulous. Thanks very much, Henry. So a question, maybe we should start with Henry answering this and then passing on to Alice perhaps. So if the school is on a very busy main road, is it better to keep the windows open or closed? So obviously lack of ventilation leads to potentially higher percentage of particulate matter, the questioner says, but is it better or worse to open the window if a school doesn't have any kind of mechanical filters or ventilation?
So I think the honest answer is we do not know, and that's why more research is needed. I mean, the key thing is that children go to school to be educated and to socialize. And so you know, one of the big factors about being near a busy road and opening a window could be the noise, because if that, you know, inhibits learning, then that may be as an important a factor as air quality. And so these are very, very complicated and nuanced questions to consider, and we really need, you know, to be very careful in how we answer them.
Yeah, and actually I wondered, Sam, if you maybe wanted to say something about Data Detectives activity which you helped design, which helps schools explore perhaps the answers to this question for their own circumstances.
Yeah, we also provide Data Detectives is kind of a flow charting tool which lets pupils, teachers identify when they have seen something unusual in their data. So, for example, it might be just a spike of really high PM. It might be something relatively benign, like it might be volatile organics from, you know, someone opening an orange or something. And then it lets them go through kind of all the potential causes, sort of work down through this flow chart, and eventually see if there's some kind of intervention which they could be doing, which will help mitigate against this, or if they need to or don't need to.
Thanks, Sam. And we also had a question about what types of interventions that we are suggesting. And I think it's important to state that we haven't sort of implemented any interventions other than the web app itself, which is a tool which schools, as Henry showed, they get to see their data in real time, but they can also analyse that data, and there's activities which support thinking about that data. And so as part of that, we're hearing from schools that they are using the SAMHE monitor and the SAMHE web app to know when is a good time for me to open my windows, when should I ventilate to get that fresh air back into the classroom, and when at other times when actually we need to keep those windows shut because actually it's not as fresh, that outside air, as I would like it to be. So yeah, thank you. I think that answers that question as well. Fabulous. Well, we have a question around naturally ventilated versus mechanically ventilated schools, which maybe Sam, you'd like to start with?
Yeah, this has been a bit of a tricky issue with our methodology because we don't necessarily have a huge amount of contextual data. You know, we've cast our monitors very wide. And so early on, we were sort of mining through EPC, energy performance certificates, to try and work out whether or not we could be certain a classroom was mechanically ventilated versus naturally ventilated. Obviously, the vast majority are naturally ventilated. I'm now thinking we probably do have enough data to say that mechanically ventilated classrooms are significantly better ventilated than naturally ventilated, probably as you'd expect.
Thanks, Sam. Henry, did you want to add anything there, or should we move on to the next question?
No, but just to say that when Sam says significantly, he means statistically significantly.
Okay, thanks, Henry. So we have a question about the openness of the data. And Henry, I wondered if you wanted to start answering this one, and then perhaps I can chip in. So the question is, do you plan to have an open dashboard showing the results? As, for example, there's a great project in the US, in Boston, that they're doing.
Yeah, so I'll just say that in Boston, they monitor in every classroom in about 121 of the Boston public schools, and then they publish this data in effect in real time on a publicly available open dashboard. The truth is that we do not have any intention to follow that route, and I think Sarah can comment on the sort of the ethical reasons why we don't think that's a good idea. Logistically, we know that it's been an incredible time drain for the research team, because rather than having some scope to analyze the data and identify issues, they tend to get flagged very quickly and not necessarily in the most helpful manner. And then the team spend a huge amount of time firefighting issues rather than actually doing research. But I'm going to hand over to Sarah to say the more important reasons as to why we don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, so I think Henry covered some of it, but I think we just think it's really important that people understand all the contextual information that is that affects the indoor air quality, and so seeing that data within the web app, having that linked out to supportive documents which explain both what that number means in the context of guidelines, for example, and really importantly what they can do about it is really important. So we're really trying to empower teachers and other school staff to look at their data and then take action to try and improve it. And so that's kind of one of the other key reasons that we're doing this. We have another question around the difference occupant density between private and state schools, and perhaps this is why we're seeing that difference, Sam, in the CO2 levels. And I wondered if you could maybe say something about that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. I think there's also a slightly larger fraction of private schools being mechanically ventilated, but on the whole, I think it's just there are smaller classrooms. Smaller classes, better facilities, so these places tend to be better ventilated.
Yeah, thank you.
And we do have methods to do a sort of controlled analysis of that if we estimate the difference in class size. So that's something we can do.
Yeah, and I think the questions that are coming in are fantastic for us, because what this is helping us see is what do we need to focus our efforts on the next month or so in terms of the analysis that Sam and Alice are going to be able to do. So thank you all so much for your suggestions. So I had a question here, which I wondered if Alice, you might like to say something about, which is around vacuum cleaners. So you talked about dust getting kind of knocked back up or resuspended into the air, Alice, as a source of particulate matter in classrooms. And somebody says that high filtration sealed HEPA vacuum cleaners might be sensible. And I wondered if you had any comments on that.
Yes, I think we think it's very likely that cleaning activities could lead to elevated levels of PM, and that's all, and kind of settled dust that happens over the summer period, like we saw in the September event, is likely to be resuspended when people come back to schools. And ideally, this would be cleaned off surfaces as quickly as possible. But if these activities do generate PM in the air, it's also advisable that those activities happen when people aren't in school, so outside occupied hours if possible, so before or after pupils are in classrooms. And yes, ideally, collecting dust as frequently as possible would be best.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Let me just see where to go to. So somebody asks, are there any schools in the cohort using mechanical ventilation with filtered intakes, such as mechanical ventilation heat recovery systems, or MVHR? I don't know if we know the answer to this yet, Sam. Is that something that
I don't think we know the answer, no. I think it's just too hard to track down that sort of thing.
Yeah. We do have an activity in the web app which allows schools to give us contextual information about their classroom, which does include a question on whether they have any kind of filtering systems in their schools. So that's something that we can look at, but we haven't had chance to yet. And I think maybe let's go to a question about teachers and feedback on their participation in the project. So the question is, did you ask teachers about their feedback on participation in the project? So if I start answering this, and then Henry, if you can chip in with anything that I might have forgotten about. So we did. So we had a really nice series of events right at the beginning of the project where teachers and pupils were helping us co-design the web app. So we got lots of detailed feedback there. We've also had a couple of sessions with teachers since then, where we've got feedback on, sort of more informal feedback on how they're using the project. And our colleagues on SAMHE at the UK HSA have done a survey for teachers and for pupils, which was an opportunity to give feedback about the project. And they also did an exercise with teachers where they were asking them to give their comments about ventilation and how they were finding the web app. There's also on the activities, there's an opportunity for all users to say whether they enjoyed the activity, whether they've learned anything. And for teachers only, we have a kind of a free text box that they can fill in with any comments. So we're getting feedback from teachers in many ways. If we get some more funding, we'd really like to do some focus groups with teachers, so we get that more kind of detailed information about which bits of the web app they're liking and finding most helpful, what they'd like to see more of if we got more funding. Henry?